The opinions and statements expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of WWDB, its staff, or management.
Good day, everyone, and welcome again to another edition of Boomer Generation Radio. This is your host, Richard Address, coming to you from the studios of WWDB AM 860 here in the Delaware Valley. And we're streaming live on www.dbam.com. And a reminder that if you want to contact the show and with any suggestions or comments, you can email us at boomergenerationradio@gmail.com. That's boomergenerationradio@gmail.com. And we have a couple of guests today on our show. This is another opportunity to meet an author, and I hope on the line, courtesy of our producer, Tony. Sheri, are you there?
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you? You're calling in from L.A., right?
I am.
Good. Well, how are things today on the coast?
The weather is beautiful, and I'm awake, so all is good.
So we're talking to Sheri Samotin, the author of Facing the Finish, a Roadmap for Aging Parents and Adult Children. And welcome, Sheri. Thank you very much for joining us and getting up early and calling in. We appreciate it. This book, very, very fascinating, filled with all kinds of very, very important practical information and a whole list of resources, websites, etc. in the back. Facing the Finish, a Roadmap for Aging Parents and Adult Children. So the obvious first question is, what made you write this? What's the background?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in L.A., left and went to college in the Northeast, spent time in New York, and then ended up in Naples, Florida, which is a haven for snowbirds. And often people move far away from their families when they're newly retired, young and healthy and energetic. And these people became my friends. Well, fast forward 15 years later, all of a sudden my 60-something-year-old friends were turning 80. And life was beginning to happen. They were dealing with death. They were dealing with serious medical illness. They were dealing with dementia, either of their own or a loved one. And they were still far away from their families. And they began asking me for all kinds of help, which was different from the relationship before when we had just kind of been extended family, both sides being far away from our core family. And what ended up happening is over and over I'd be asked for the same help, the same questions, and out of that back in 2009, started a business. The business then became the book as clients and friends started saying, where can I buy the book? So eventually I wrote it.
So the book, Facing the Finish, well, where can you get the book? Is this on Amazon and bookstores?
It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, or you can get it from facingthefinish.com directly from the website, and it's available both as a physical book as well as an e-book.
So Facing the Finish is if I'm correct, the name of the business, correct?
My business is actually LifeBridge Solutions. LifeBridge
Solutions, that's right, that's okay. And I'm holding the brochure. And LifeBridge Solutions, very, very important. Inside it says, offers a compassionate and carefully planned approach to coping with life-changing and difficult events. Translate that. What does that mean? What is Life Transitions do?
Okay, well, what I wish everyone would do would be to have a life transition plan. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's kind of like an owner's manual for your life. So we have an owner's manual for our car and our dishwasher and pretty much anything with a moving part. Why not one for our lives? And what I find is when people go down that path, it's easy to gather up their list of accounts or their list of important phone numbers, but pretty much everybody runs out of steam when they start dealing with the really important questions like, where do I want to live out my years? Where do I want to die? What am I going to do if I can't take care of myself? How am I going to pay for it? Who do I want to care for me? Who do I want making decisions for me? So that's what a life transition plan is, and that's what I wish all my clients would do. The reality is I usually get called in the midst of a crisis, often by adult children, who are dealing at long distance with parents aging and something happened and they don't know what to do or where to turn. And then we also provide practical daily services like daily money management, which is managing the mail, paying the bills, dealing with Medicare, waiting on hold with the cable company, whatever it is that our older adult or special needs clients can't do for themselves.
If you could solve the waiting on hold for the cable company problem, you'd retire in a minute. This
and I wish I could. Unfortunately, so far the only way to do it is to wait.
This idea of a plan. We've had financial people on a regular basis here on Boomer Generation Radio. Everybody talks about the need to sit down when you're, quote, healthy, when you can make decisions outside of a crisis, as you just mentioned, to have this plan, a financial plan, a caregiving plan, a facility where you want to live plan, even a dying plan. So the obvious follow-up question to that, Sheri, is, in your experience having done this and doing this for years, why is it still so difficult for people to do this?
Well, I think that there's three reasons. Number one, the subjects of money and death are still taboo subjects in many families and in many cultures. We just don't share information about what's going on financially, and people aren't comfortable talking about death. So I think those are two very practical issues. I think that, though, that there's a third reason, and that is that the two generations, the older adults and the adult children, have in their own minds assumptions about starting the conversation, and because of those assumptions, they simply don't go there.
Such as?
And in particular, I find I have many older adult clients who actually would like to talk about this with their families, but they fear that doing so will upset their children or scare them or burden them in some way. And I have adult children clients who want to start the conversation, and they're afraid that doing so will upset or depress their parents.
We're talking with Sheri Samotin, the author of Facing the Future, a roadmap for aging parents and their adult children. And you can obtain this book, as Sheri was saying, through Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's a print book and an e-book. And you're listening to Boomer Generation Radio here on WWDB AM 860 in Philadelphia, brought to you in large part by our friends at the Kendall Corporation, who are, through their work, helping to transform this challenge of aging in the United States of America. Life Transition Services, Life Bridge Solutions. Is it like a coaching service, Sheri?
Well, some of our work is the coaching work, and the other, as I said, is the practical day-to-day daily money management, which is really, with in front of the computer and with the pencil pushed behind the ear.
Mm-hmm. And this is because you're calling it from LA. Is this a national program, or is it just right now localized? Okay, so somebody's listening and say, well, maybe I can call this woman up and get some help because we really have to do this. How does one get in touch with you?
The easiest way is email, and that would be info@lifebridgesolutions.com, info@lifebridgesolutions.com, and I respond to all of them.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's becoming more and more, I don't know what the right word is, it's challenging. Let's just use challenging, is what I'm calling the economics of aging. The cost, the sheer cost of growing older in the United States of America, from healthcare issues to medical concerns to the actual moving of an individual from point A to point B. Is this part of the way you develop a plan for your clients?
I do. You know what? I like to say, let's let the math talk, because very often in families there's disagreement about where mom or dad should live and or how mom or dad should be cared for. And when we actually put the black and white together of the numbers and lay it out over not a month or two, but years, sometimes as long as 10 or 15 years if we're dealing with someone newly diagnosed with something like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, letting the math talk is really important to making good decisions.
How much of a challenge is, and I'm sure you get involved with this, of the long distance caring? You know, this comes up a lot in our conversations with working with individuals that I've worked with. I'm sure this comes up on a regular basis. You're in L.A., you know, you'll get a call from somebody living in Tarzana saying, you know, mom and dad are living in their condominium. They moved out to Scottsdale, but they're getting older and frailer, and we can't go back and forth, so we need to move them back into where we are. How how often do you get that challenging question?
Oh, I'd say every day. And, you know, where it really begins with is coming up with the goal of, number one, our job is to keep mom or dad safe. That's number one. And number two is as independent as possible given the reality of their medical situation, their cognitive situation, and their financial situation. And, you know, the call that you've just expressed, we're going to move them back, I usually say, whoa, Nellie, and let's slow down here, and let's figure out, you know, can mom or dad articulate what they want? Because maybe all their friends are in Scottsdale. Mm-hmm. And if you move them to Tarzana and all they have is the four walls of the room that they're living in, they may become very isolated and very miserable very quickly, and maybe there's another solution. And so what I like to do is help families figure out how to build a team. That team might be close to where mom or dad is, or maybe the team is close to where the kids are, and maybe the answer is to bring mom or dad closer. It's a very personal and individualized decision and discussion.
In dealing with our generation, dealing with the baby boom generation, who wants to, you know, we were raised trying to control everything, and we're seeing this all over our society, trying to control our own aging and trying to control our own death. This concept of independence, you allude to it in the book, and I'm sure you run into this. We want to stay as independent as long as possible. You know, I'm sure you've had situations where you've had that life plan conversation where it just becomes absolutely imperative to tell that older adult, it's impossible, you just can't do this anymore because of the needs that you have. Walk me through a scenario of how, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but and I know each case is different, but generally, how do we deal with that reality, coming to the reality that we're losing our ability to live independently?
Well, I have that situation with a client family right now. So mom was on death's door, enrolled in hospice. She rallied. Hospice went away, and now she's living at home with 24/7 care, and she's a queen. She thinks this is great. Mm-hmm. The issue is the family realizes they cannot afford this indefinitely, and they're also concerned that while the caregivers are wonderful, that perhaps a different kind of living environment would be better for her emotionally and socially as well. While mom doesn't want any part of moving out of her home, there's 6 children involved. 4 of them are on board with a move. 2 of them are not. So how do we navigate that? Well, one way is to try to find points of agreement. So what I've been able to do is get all of them, mom and the 6 kids, to agree that they want her to be safe and independent. We've then moved from there to define what does independent realistically mean for her for now, and have set some goals at home and said, if we can achieve these goals within a time frame, and in this case the time frame is 3 months, then we can reduce the caregiving, and then she can probably stay at home for a while. If we cannot achieve these specific goals at home within 3 months, then we're going to have to transition, and we've selected the assisted living facility where that will be.
This sibling rivalry that to use a common phrase, you know, when you have X numbers of siblings in agreement, but you have probably a vocal minority of siblings who are not. How often do you run into this, and what happens when the 2 siblings or the siblings just don't agree?
Well, I run into this all the time, and that may be, you know, honestly, I may see more of it because people with family issues are the ones who tend to call people like me for help. When everybody agrees, maybe they don't need me. But what I find is very often, again, if we can find points of agreement, Sometimes we have to let the math do the talking, because very often, even though everyone says it's not about the money, in fact it is.
Right.
We may have, those two siblings may be worried about burning through what will be their inheritance, and that's what's really driving them. And they don't want to say that. Maybe they don't even consciously know it. But unless we unpack that and deal with it, then the issues are going to still come up. But sometimes these siblings are going back to the kitchen table from when they were 12 and 14, and they're kind of having the same arguments they had then about who does dad like better and how come mom favors you and all of those kinds of things. So some of it is so ingrained and so deep that we finally have to work around it. And I hate to do that, but there's times when the practical reality is one of the siblings isn't going to get on board. They're going to be unhappy. So we need to give them every opportunity to participate, and if they can't or they won't, we've got to move forward anyway.
Yeah, one of the most amazing things in the work that I do, with in my community and in the JewishSacredAging.com website and talks, is how often that what you exactly said comes true, that the patterns that were established in childhood amongst brothers and sisters emerge at these times in very sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways. It's always fascinating to me, and invariably, well, not invariably, but often, and I'm sure you've had that conversation in your office or in somebody's home where somebody just reverts back to, well, you always did it this way, or, mom always treated you this way, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a fascinating scenario to see played out, and really can impact, and often does, the caregiving component of an adult child to their parent. We're talking with Sheri Samotin, the author of Facing the Future, A Roadmap for Aging Parents and Their Adult Children, a book that's available electronically through the usual sources, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, also available as an e-book. And Sheri's involved with and heads LifeBridge Solutions, helping you to navigate life's transitions. And again, the contact information, Sheri, to get a hold of you, that website, and how do they do that? Info at what?
Sure. To email, the best way is info@lifebridgesolutions.com. And for more information about the book, just go to facingthefinish.com, and you can even order the book and the workbook directly from there.
So I want to ask you about what I call the B word, which I would imagine in your work comes up, I would bet you every once in a while, and that is burden. I don't want to be a burden to my, and then fill in the blank. How often do you see this? I'm going to bet that you see it on a fairly regular basis. How does this get played out in making that life plan?
Well, I do. And often the people who don't want to be the burden many times are the very best planners, because they realize that by making decisions, articulating those decisions to someone, and maybe they're not ready to give that information to their children, but they'll leave it with me or an attorney or an accountant or a clergy person, somebody who's a trusted advisor. And what I say to clients is just give them that person's card and let your kids know that when the time comes, they should break the glass and pull out the card, and that person knows what you will need to know. But I find that people who are worried about being a burden very often are the best planners. They will actually make decisions and implement their decisions. Not always, but often.
So you mentioned the role of a clergy person. So as one, I do want to ask you this question. In your conversations in making these life plans with LifeBridge, how often does the issue of one's own spirituality come into play in making this life plan?
Well, I always ask questions around that. Questions like, how do you define a meaningful life at this point in your life, and what is your purpose? Because in my work, I find that people who have a reason to get up every day beyond simply being here for another day are often doing better physically and cognitively and emotionally because that spiritual component is there. So I like to bring it up, and I find that the clients who are able to have that conversation and think in that way are actually better able to make tough decisions like leaving their home of 40 years, for example, because we begin to talk about what makes it a home. Is it the pictures on the wall, which can go with you, or is it the walls themselves and the memories that those walls contain? And we talk about making new memories because we get to keep doing that until our last breath.
You know, I'm sure you've run across this in the years that you've been developing this, not only in the book but also in the business in LifeBridge Solutions. But what would you say, based upon your experience, are some of the mistakes that adult children will make when caring, when wanting to care for their aging parents? Where everybody's in many places, they're very well motivated. We want to do something for mom and dad. And even at the end of your book, that you talk about the Judeo-Christian thrust of the fifth commandment of honoring and respecting a parent. But for our audience, what are some of the what you would say 2 or 3 basic mistakes that may be made by an adult child trying to do the right thing?
Well, number one, it's not having important conversations at the right time, and either because of fear or busyness or whatever it is, those things don't get done. So that's the number one thing, and I advise everyone, let's talk about things often and early because it's much better to do it from a place of this is just normal as opposed to in the midst of a crisis. So I'd say that's number one. However, once an adult child is in the kind of caregiving mode, the biggest mistake I see is adult children who take over rather than taking charge. And there's a very fine line between taking charge and taking over, but taking over isn't the answer.
So give me the distinction.
For me, the distinction is around something I said earlier, and that is our job is to keep mom or dad safe. And for me, safety is the difference. So if mom or dad shouldn't be driving and they're getting into accidents and hurting themselves or property or, God forbid, other people, you have to step in and take over and get them out of that situation, take the keys away, which is really hard to do. That's a safety issue. You have to take over. But sometimes the discussions are around decisions that are not safety issues. They're about independence issues, perhaps, but not safety issues. And what I remind adult children is, if mom or dad has the capacity to make a decision, they can make what you think are good ones, or they can make what you think are bad ones, same as you. So just because you make what I think is a bad decision, does that mean you lack capacity and I should take over? I don't think so. So it's that understanding that just because you don't agree with a decision doesn't mean it's a bad one.
No, I know in our tradition, as a commentaries, medieval commentaries on that fifth commandment, really discuss actually, and there's some literature even in the contemporary world, the concept of stewardship, in the sense of an older adult, of a parent is mentally competent, understands the decisions they're making, but I, as that adult child, happen to disagree with it. I see this a lot of times between a traditional burial versus cremation. This is coming up a lot lately. And in counseling people, you'll say, you may disagree with this, and you may have a conversation with your parent, but they know that's they have the right to make up their mind, and your duty is to respect that wish, even though you may particularly happen to disagree with it. We also see this in people coming home who choose, for example, in very, very serious illnesses. I'm thinking of several families with cancers, and they basically say, I made up my mind. I don't want any more. I'm taking charge. I'm coming home. I'll go into hospice. I want to understand the end of my life and control it, and with people in the family saying, no, you can't do this. How can you do this? It's a very tenuous tightrope that a lot of times is being walked, which I'm sure you see all the time.
Well, exactly, and I see it both with clients who are caring for family members, but also as a professional fiduciary when I'm have been appointed as someone's guardian or healthcare decision maker or conservator, I have to use the doctrine of substituted judgment, which is what would that person have done had they been able to do that decision themselves, versus the best interest doctrine, which is what do I think is in his or her best interest. And that's that fine line between taking charge and taking over and knowing which side of the line you're on.
Before we run out of time, and we're about to, I want to ask you your advice that you would, I'm sure this comes up as well. You talk about the documents, the advance directives, the healthcare proxies, the wills, etc. These are very, very important documents. How do you advise your clients where to place these documents? Who should have these documents? This comes up a lot, so that people don't have to go searching for them or locked away in a safe deposit box.
Correct. Originals should be entrusted to the people who are named in the documents. So, for example, your healthcare surrogate should have original documents, copies as well, but they should have an original document in a place where they can access it. Mm-hmm. It's always a good idea if an attorney has drafted them. Most attorneys will hold originals for safekeeping as well, so that you have a backup original set. But putting it in a safety deposit box where nobody can access it after a death, for example, doesn't help anybody. It's locked away in a place where nobody can get to it.
Wow. So, Sheri, I want to thank you very, very much again. Real fast, how can people access the book, Facing the Finish, and also get in touch with you regarding LifeBridge Solutions? Give us those contacts one more time.
Sure. So facingthefinish.com is where to go for the book, the workbook, or to join the community. If they click on download free stuff, and they can register, and they'll be able to access other materials that I offer for free. And if they want to reach me directly or learn more about my business, info@lifebridgesolutions.com is the place to go.
Thank you very, very much, Sheri, for joining us here this morning, for getting up real early in L.A. and calling in to us here. Facing the Finish, A Roadmap for Aging Parents and Adult Children is the name of the book. And it follows up, and you can contact Sheri at LifeBridge Solutions, and with that information and contact information that she just gave you, and it'll be on the podcast here at WWDB as well. So, Sheri, thank you very, very much. I wish you nothing but success and good health, and congratulations on all this good work that you're doing. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.